Welcome to another Kosovo Dispatch episode. Today we're going to talk about the legal and political consequences of the Association of Serb-Majority Municipalities in Kosovo. In 2013, under the auspices of the European Union facilitated dialogue between Kosovo and Serbia, Kosovo agreed to establish an association of Serb-Majority municipalities. 2 years later, Kosovo and Serbia agreed on the general principles and main elements on the association, which entailed that the Kosovo Serb community would be given certain autonomous powers on matters such as healthcare, urban planning, and education, among others. The 2015 deal was ratified in the Kosovo Assembly, but met with swift resistance and increased tension by the opposition, mainly the Self-Determination Party, which is currently governing the country. Consequently, the president of Kosovo requested from the Constitutional Court to assess the agreement's compatibility with the Constitution. The verdict of the Constitutional Court on the association states that the general principles of the agreement are not entirely in compliance with the Constitution of Kosovo. However, the court calls for its implementation based on the 2013 agreement. Specifically, Article 2 of the verdict says the following. The association community of the Serb-Majority municipalities is to be established as provided by the first agreement. However, the court ruling has yet to be implemented. Prime Minister Kurti has stated on multiple occasions that the association should not be implemented by any means. At the same time, the international community has been pressuring Kosovo to implement the agreement, and the European Union has recently proposed a draft statute, which is currently under discussion and has not been made public yet. Agon Maliqi joins us today to discuss this topic. He's an independent analyst and consultant with extensive experience in the Western Balkans and South Caucasus. Agon is the co-founder of Sbunker and also served as board chairman of the organization. Hi, Agon. Thank you so much for joining the second episode of the Kosovo Dispatch. We're really glad to have you on.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
In this episode, we're discussing the Association of Serb-Majority Municipalities in Kosovo, and I'd like to jump right into it and first ask you if you think that the establishment of the association is a domestic and international obligation for Kosovo.
Well, absolutely. I think it is. No matter, in general in Kosovo, it's now kind of treated as something optional, but it is both a political and legal commitment that Kosovo hasn't undertaken. It has a basis in the Ahtisaari proposal. Starting from there, it is part of the Brussels Agreement, which is the international commitment that Kosovo has taken as part of the dialogue in Brussels. And as such, now it has become effectively attached to Kosovo's EU accession path as a commitment, just like Serbia has commitments are becoming a part of its accession path. And also legally, it's a commitment because, even the famous Constitutional Court decision, which in Kosovo was, said to have sort of brought down the ASM or found it unconstitutional, did not find it unconstitutional per se. It only found issues with it that, and then kind of provided recommendations on how it could be brought within the constitutional framework. So in a way, it is a part of Kosovo's constitutional legality and political reality. But there's a but here in terms of the political nuance. So while it is a commitment, it comes kind of attached to something else. It's a political and legal commitment that Kosovo has undertaken with the assumption that it will get other things in return, meaning, unlocking its international position first, and secondly, making sure that the ASM is kind of it does not hamper the unitary nature of the state. The concerns here are, or why this is being delayed is that there are, there's a feeling that these two guarantees might not be met, and so this commitment is treated in a way as conditional and optional.
Yeah. So if the association is an internal and domestic and international obligation, as you're saying, does that mean that the Kosovo government is breaking the law by not implementing it?
I would defer this specific more technical question on the legal aspect to lawyers, constitutional lawyers, whether that's actually a breach of law. There's a lot of laws or constitutional provisions, which exist, or rights which exist, and then, are not implemented by states because sometimes they require like bylaws, or, laws cannot operate by themselves. They need, institutions, mechanisms, bylaws for them to become operational. So here we have nothing. We only have the decision of the Constitutional Court, and then we don't have a statute. We don't have anything for it to be. So I'm not really technically sure whether we can say this is a breach of the law, but we can say that it's a bit of a breach of a political commitment. I would rather talk of it in that term. So this is a commitment that governments have taken, and previous governments have undertaken on behalf of Kosovo, which are international commitments, and the current government has agreed to within the current dialogue process. So, and I do think that, and I think this is important to highlight, is that, and maybe this is the biggest breach, is that political breach, is that what is expected from Kosovo at this stage, at least, is not to just establish the ESM. It is just to start the process and of the statute and get the ball rolling. Yeah. Which is not the same as creating it. So I think by not taking this step, I do think that Kosovo has not has created this sort of idea that it's not really playing along with this request.
Yeah, Agon Maliqi's Self-Determination Party came to power by promising not to implement the court's decision not to implement the establishment of the ASM. But in March 2023, Kosovo accepted the EU proposal for normalization of relations, which entails a level of self-management for Kosovo Serbs. Do you think that the Prime Minister Kurti has changed his approach regarding this issue? And do you see that he's going to initiate or maybe start drafting his own statute?
In essence, the Prime Minister has accepted that the ASM should be part of. Has accepted it as a concept, and has accepted by agreeing that all previous agreements had to be implemented in a way. He has said yes to the ASM, and also in public statements a few months ago, I believe it was in spring, he did specifically say that the ASM will be part of the agreement. His insistence, however, is that, and this is where there's a lot of ambiguity. I think the policy is not necessarily one of yes or no, but more of ambiguity, which is a political strategy to create kind of, it also could be said as a negotiating strategy in a way, to kind of suggest both ways, to increase Kosovo's leverage in the negotiations of how the ASM will look like, first of all, and how what will be its powers and what will Kosovo get in terms of its international recognitions. We've had contradictory statements from various leaders on this issue, but fundamentally, I do think that the Prime Minister has agreed that the ASM will be part of the broader agreement. It's just that I think his interpretation of of the agreement is sort of conditioned. So yes, it will be part of it, but it will very much depend on how the rest of the things look like. So what will that ASM look like, and whether that agreement will be signed, whether there is a belief that Serbia will stick to its part of the bargain and Kosovo sort of will de facto recognize Kosovo. So it's more of a yes but kind of answer so far.
Yes, but it's been 9 years since the Constitutional Court has stated that, well, it's not fully in compliance with the Constitution, but it must be implemented. That's what the court verdict says. And none of the Kosovo government so far has put forward a proposal on how the ASM should look like. We've had contradictory statements like, Prime Minister Kurti says that it should be part of the future agreements, but then he says that it shouldn't be implemented, or it's a new Republika Srpska. And recently, the Foreign Minister Grvala Švarc stated that the association is dead. So there's no clarity. We know what the government doesn't want, but we don't know what they want. We haven't seen any concrete plans how they want to deal with this. Do you find this problematic, or do you think that Kosovo government should change its approach, especially considering that they have 50% in the parliament, 50% of seats? They have a huge political power and support.
It's hard to predict and understand how this government position is formulated. One of it could be, as I said, the strategy of ambiguity. In negotiations, a lot of parties use this, to sort of signal various, positions at the same time to keep everyone kind of on edge on what the actual position is. Mm-hmm. But the second could be, and I'm more inclined to believe the second one, is that it's a strategy of stalling and delaying for as much as possible, and sort of not wanting to implement, which could be motivated by two factors, one being either domestic political reasons, or the second being the fact that they do not believe that Serbia will stick to its side of the bargain. So the belief that if Kosovo commits and starts implementing the ASM, Kosovo will be stuck with a new institutional setup and structure that might alter its internal functioning, while not resolving its international sort of position. So, which realistically speaking, could be a very big problem for Kosovo. So if they believe that this will be the scenario and this will be the case, and this belief is so high on Vučić, which is justifiable, I don't think anybody trusts Vučić's intentions on this. But the concern here is that it seems as if the Kosovo's leadership does not trust the mediators either. So, or their capacity to force Serbia's hand on this. So I believe that their position on the ASM is kind of, ambiguous, unclear, because first they might want to really not want to implement it for domestic reasons. Secondly, as I said, they might strongly believe that even if they do implement, the other side will not stick to its side of the bargain. So hence, it's not worth pursuing this.
You mentioned domestic reasons. 1 year from now, Kosovo is expected to have new elections, a general election. So what are your thoughts on whether the ASM will be effectively put into practice this year, between now and early next year? And what sorts of challenges do you think we can expect?
I'll revert back to something you said earlier about the government's current potential to push forward the ASM. I do think that they have the political capital to do that. They do have a majority in parliament, but also a moral authority to make a bold kind of case that something needs to be done. And they do have a lot of trust within their base. However, they do not, it still is a little bit of they might make the case that they will need a new legitimacy to come with these decisions, because, as you said earlier, this was a huge part of their narrative in opposition. So, in a way, they did not come with a mandate to say yes to the ASM. So they might come up with this idea that new elections are needed to legitimize any steps forward. The problem with this is that time is precious, and if more time is wasted, then the other parameters will change. Yes, Vučić will still be there, Serbia will still be there, but maybe the international context gets worse in the US and the EU. So the dialogue could take other twists and turns, and whatever is on offer now might not be on offer a year from now. So this is the risk now of prolonging, of going into elections, of seeking new legitimacy, to take decisions which might be unpopular, but are also maybe really needed urgently.
Do you think that the Kosovo government is also calculating on the fact that there's so many countries that are going to experience elections this year? I read it somewhere that there's 50 countries that are going to have elections this year. So Do you think that the Kurti government would rather wait after the elections to sort of reposition themselves?
More likely than not for this new context to be worse for Kosovo. Kosovo would risk entering a new political situation, inheriting the same position it has now, which is, a bit of, isolation, no EU NATO perspective, no international recognitions. On the other hand, there will be, there are, I think, genuine concerns that even if an agreement is agreed now, it will take time for it to be implemented. So you would risk agreeing to something now, and you will be uncertain of what the conditions will be when you start implementation. So I think that drives a lot of the uncertainty. I do believe that it's most likely that they want to postpone this, unless they receive some strong guarantees now, fast, that things by the mediators, I think things would move fast on a lot of fronts, like Council of Europe membership, like on movement on the non-recognizers. If some of these incentives could move fast, perhaps there could be space for Kosovo to also start moving on its side of the bargain. I really think it's unpredictable what the positions will be, but I also do think that the unpredictability of Kosovo's position is, in a way, part of a design strategy, but more of a strategy of, waiting and seeing what the variables are, what the actors are, and how the situation evolves.
Would you say reactionary?
I think it's more reactionary. Other part of the strategy, hoping that the situation in the north changes in a way so that a new reality is created on the north in the meantime. So Kosovo gets more consolidates, at least formally, its presence in the north. But I do think that is a bit of a risky strategy to bet on, because that integration will still be very fragile. While Kosovo's bigger problem is the international position, which in a context of a new geopolitical environment, like fresh, new administration in the US, more far-right parties in Europe, I don't think Kosovo will find a more favorable transatlantic context than it has right now.
Yeah. What international political consequences could we face if the Kosovo government continues to delay the implementation of the association?
I think the international consequences have softened and are softening in that there are actors within the West who are more willing now to advocate on behalf of Kosovo, especially after Banska. Especially in terms of security. I think that the support there is now actually intensifying by UK, US. But on the political front, I do think that Kosovo will not see the kind of support it needs, especially on the non-recognizers, on Council of Europe membership, on sort of the items that are priority for Kosovo's agenda, if it is not seen as at least willing to give the dialogue a try this year, sort of at least not being the side that creates the obstacles. So, as I said, nobody's asking for Kosovo to establish the ASM. The request is to initiate the process. Mediators also agree there is a parallel between the moment when the ASM is actually created and Serbia's de facto recognition. So these things now go hand in hand, and you saw that in the joint statement of the foreign ministries, in which de facto recognition is sort of effectively tied to the creation of the ASM. So, but I think the mediators will support this only if they see Kosovo taking steps, and if it doesn't, then Kosovo, the biggest consequence will be just remaining in the current position it is right now.
So time's not on our side.
Time has not been on Kosovo's side for the past decade. So all these missed opportunities have costs, and the costs grow with time. And the costs are greater for Kosovo than for Serbia because of our international limbo, which does not mean that Kosovo doesn't have leverage to play and negotiate strongly. It's just that it should not keep missing opportunities when they arise.
Agon Maliqi, thank you so much for joining the podcast.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.